It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here in Wisconsin. I was supposed to be at the Board of Regents meeting last week. Had to Skype in, not because of your weather, but because of weather in Atlanta. We had tornadoes and so forth, but like our colleague from Nevada, I left 72 degrees in Atlanta last night. So it's nice to be at a place that knows how to do winter right. I am your rubber band. I will be responsible for creating some tension as we start the proceedings off this morning. I want to say in advance that I'm very supportive of the efforts that you're doing collaboratively across Wisconsin. This is now, I think, my 5th or 6th trip to Wisconsin over the last two or so years. I've spoken at Madison, I've spoken at Milwaukee Area Technical College and so forth, and I've spoken at some state events. And this kind of cross-campus collaboration is not only good for sharing ideas, but I'm going to suggest in my remarks in a moment, actually helps accelerate the rate of change, especially for those of you who are increasingly using some of these student success technologies. I also want to say that I'm a longtime supporter of Complete College America and its work. I also am an advisor to EAB's Moonshot initiative, and both of these national networks are designed to accelerate the change we all need to make. And as Debbie did, I'm going to start with the challenge in front of us. These data are from the New York Times. This is the percent of Americans who actually hold the bachelor's degree. The data are disaggregated by economic quartile. So what you are looking at are the last 40 years from 1970 to the present. What you can see, even if you're way in the back of the room, there have been significant changes in college attainment over the last generation, but entirely in the upper half of the economic spectrum. In fact, if you're among the 25% wealthiest Americans, your prospects of holding a college degree have basically doubled over the last 40 years. 40% of the population held the bachelor's back in 1970. Now it's up over 80%. That's fantastic, and we do want to celebrate that. But it's not the story of most of the campuses in this room, and it's not the story of Georgia State. Georgia State's story lies in that bottom band. Most of the students we enroll at Georgia State are among the 25% least wealthy Americans in the United States. And as you can see there, the picture is much more sobering. Despite all our national and statewide efforts, we've moved the needle hardly at all. And what you can see graphically here is the gap between the wealthiest and least wealthy Americans is not getting narrower. It's basically doubled over the last generation. So take those national data, add to them these, that over the last 6-7 years, we've crossed an important threshold across the United States. For the first time since these data have been collected, the majority of K through 12 public school children working their way through the pipeline now qualify as low income. In fact, you can draw a line roughly from the DC area to California. Almost every state south of that line is already past the 50% mark. My home state of Georgia is already above the 60% mark. And I can assure you that line is year by year creeping northward. So, this should give all of us pause, because we as a nation have not figured out how to graduate low-income students from college at scale. We've gotten much better at the last generation in getting them into college, but not getting them successfully with their degrees. And yet that's the majority of students currently working their way through the K through 12 pipeline. It's also a good introduction to my home campus, Georgia State University. Like UW-Milwaukee, we are an urban campus. In fact, in some ways, a more urban campus, because we're located right in the middle of downtown Atlanta. That's not just a pretty picture of the skyline. The white building on the right is our largest academic building. In fact, the houses our big advising center, which I'll talk more about, our business school, our policy school, one of our classroom buildings, all in that picture. We're just mixed in to the downtown fabric of Atlanta. We have 35,000 students on that Atlanta campus. 3 years ago, we were consolidated by the state of Georgia with the largest community college system in Georgia. So overnight, we grew by about 20,000 students. So we're about 54,000 students in total. Most of my comments this morning will be about our bachelor's efforts at the Atlanta campus, but at the very end, I will tell you, kind of give you an update, a progress report on how we're doing in helping our community college campuses as well. The reality is Georgia State has not been well known historically. We are not the University of Georgia, the big football powerhouse up in Athens. We're also not Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's located about 1.5 miles north of us, one of the most elite public universities in the United States. If there's any claim to fame that Georgia State has historically, it may be our geography. We have the very uncommon distinction of having our campus bisected by a National Park Service historic district. The Martin Luther King district cuts our campus in half. The office I work in every morning is about 4 blocks away from that brick building at the bottom of the screen. That's Ebenezer Baptist Church, where the Reverend King and his father before him were head pastors. You walk up the block a few more feet, and you get to his gravesite. It's right there off the downtown streets in Atlanta, and then a little further up, his childhood home, that kind of mustard-colored house at the top of the screen. So at Georgia State, we're living and working every day in this geography that is truly infused with historical significance, and yet for much of our history, we did not live up to the legacy. I pulled these pictures from the Georgia State photo archives. This is what Georgia State looked like when the Reverend King was doing his Nobel Peace Prize winning civil rights work. We were a segregated campus, all white, well into the 1960s. You know, think of the sad irony of that this, a civil rights icon is living and working literally a couple blocks away from this institution that is the very embodiment of everything he's fighting against. But much more recently than the 1960s, we were grossly underperforming overall, and especially with regard to our students of color. So these are our so-called success rates as of 15 years ago. Overall, our graduation rate hovered around 30%, and we were a poster child nationally for equity gaps, right? Every year, every semester, the middle and upper income students outperformed the low income students. As you can see from this chart, the white students outperformed the students of color. In fact, there's some eerie parallels here because our graduation rate for African American students at the time was around 22%. And in fact, for African American males, it was only 18%. Very similar to the data that Debbie just shared about African American success rates across the Milwaukee metro region. And what makes Georgia State's story hopefully useful for your purposes, and I hope a little bit inspirational, is what's happened at Georgia State on the surface since these numbers were locked in would not suggest to the pundits that Georgia State would be the site of a turnaround. For one thing, we've been going through very significant demographic changes at Georgia State. When I arrived as a junior faculty member right out of my PhD program, this was the late 1980s, Georgia State was a majority white institution. Over 70% of our student population was white. We became an MSI, a minority-serving institution, over a decade ago, and every year since, we have become increasingly diverse, to the point now where we're over 70% non-white. There's no majority population at Georgia State any longer. Our largest single group are African-American students, about 39%. Our 2 fastest growing groups are Hispanic and our Asian students. So you take those demographic shifts and add to them these, that also over the last 15 or so years, our students have gotten a lot less well-resourced financially. So the recession hit Atlanta really hard. There was a point during the recession where among all U.S. metro areas, Atlanta simultaneously had the highest unemployment rate and the highest default rate on home mortgages. And when those kind of economic downturns occur, they don't distribute equally across the population. You know, the families that send their sons and daughters to the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, were doubtlessly hurt by the recession, but they were not predominantly the families losing jobs and homes. Those were the families that send their sons and daughters to Georgia State. And over a 5-year period, starting in 2008, we doubled the number of Pell-eligible students we enroll at Georgia State. We went from a campus that was about 30% to one that is now almost 60% of the student population is Pell-eligible. To put that in some kind of perspective, this spring semester at Georgia State, we are currently enrolling 28,900 Pell students. The entire Ivy League combined this spring is enrolling about 9,800. So we're trying to educate 3 times the number of low-income students as the entire Ivy League combined. It's not going to be business as usual. And more than that, and this is going to be a recurring theme in my comments this morning, it's not the opportunity to create a program. You know, in higher education, when we've got a problem, one of our first reactions is, let's create a specialty program to address it. You know, we're going to do an African American male initiative, we're going to do a first generation program, a Pell program, and so forth. And you know, our colleagues up the street at Georgia Tech, that may be a model that works. They have a summer bridge program for their Pell students every summer. So they come a couple weeks earlier and they get them onboarded. I'm not criticizing that at all, but every year in their freshman class, they've got a couple hundred Pell students. And so you can create a little summer special program for that group of students. When you have 28,900 Pell students, you don't create a program for the students. You change the institution and the way it interacts with all students. And that's just, I think, the most distinctive thing you're going to hear from me this morning about Georgia State compared to the status quo in higher education. When we found something that worked, we didn't do it for a subgroup, for a population. We just changed the way Georgia State interacts with all students. A couple other details in setting up my comments. We have not been getting more selective. Over the time period I'm going to be describing this morning, our incoming freshman SAT scores are down by 33 points. Not a badge of shame in any way. This was intentional given our admissions policy and our agreement with the state to admit more students. It was getting so ridiculously competitive to get into the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech. This fall at Georgia Tech, the average income SAT score for incoming freshmen is around a 1460. So you have to be among the top 1% of U.S. SAT test takers to have an average chance of getting into Georgia Tech. The average high school GPA for an incoming freshman at the University of Georgia this fall was above a 4.0. So you have to have an A-plus GPA, and you have to be in the top 3% of high school graduates in the state of Georgia to have an average chance of getting into the University of Georgia. So the state came to us a decade ago and said, you know, where are we going to send the students who are doing everything we tell them to do? Stay in high school, take your college prep classes, take the SAT, apply to college, and then we're saying, you know, sorry, there's no room for you at any of the comprehensive four-year institutions. So Georgia State made a commitment to the state about a decade ago to grow our enrollment, and you know, this is one of the consequences. Another consequence, not of that agreement, but of the recession, was that we have far fewer resources to do it. So over the last 10 years, we've lost about $40 million in state appropriations. In fact, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education, Georgia is now one of the top 5 states in the nation when it comes to disinvesting in higher education. So you put this picture together, this context together, it would be very easy to point fingers, right? The problem's K through 12, the test scores are going down. When K through 12 does a better job of prepping students, we'll do a better job of graduating them. Or the problem is the state legislature. They keep slashing our budget. When they give us more appropriations, we'll do a better job of supporting our students. But what Georgia State did a decade ago, quite publicly, and I must admit initially it was uncomfortable, was to take a different tack. We began to ask the central question, are we the problem? You know, if 7 out of 10 students were coming to Georgia State and dropping out with debt and nothing to show for it, yeah, it'd be nice if K through 12 did a better job of prepping them, or the state gave us more money, but clearly there must be some things we are doing that is causing some of these students not to be able to realize their dream and get their degrees. So we got much better with the data, and we began to focus the data upon ourselves, put a mirror to ourselves, try to find the things that we as an institution are doing that are tripping up the students, use the data to try interventions, and then, as I mentioned a minute ago, scale these interventions up across the whole student body. I've tried hard with my faculty and staff at Georgia State to keep the focus on what we do and our responsibility. You know, we could say what we want to do is help public schools in Georgia to prep students better for college, and given our position, you know, put a lot of energy into that and move the needle hardly at all. On the other hand, if we say we need to do a better job of advising our students, or registering them, or packaging them for aid and so forth, we have a lot of control over those matters, and it's a much shorter route to make substantive, transformative change. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is give you 5 examples. In each case, I'm going to start with the data point we discovered in our own data that showed that we were doing a terrible job. We were letting our students down. And then I'm going to show how we use the data to introduce some scaled interventions. First example is this one, 19%. As recently as 2015, 19% was the percent of our incoming confirmed freshman class that never showed up for a day of classes at Georgia State. This is the issue known nationally as summer melt. This is not the same as students getting admitted to your school and going someplace else. This is much more insidious. These are students who get admitted and confirm they're attending. They come to orientation, they sign up for classes, they may even put a housing deposit down. And then the start of classes roll around for the fall semester and they're nowhere to be seen. 19%. So we went to the data. We wanted to understand who these students were. What happened to them? They're fully prepared and qualified and confirmed to begin at a Research 1 university, and they're nowhere to be found. So we used National Student Clearinghouse data to track these students for a 12-month period. What we found was disturbing. that 12 months after they were confirmed to start at Georgia State, almost 300 students hadn't attended a single day of post-secondary work anywhere across the United States. They had just melted out of the system. And look at the profile of these students, mostly non-white, mostly low income, exactly the kind of students we need to succeed with as a nation. But something's happening in the 3 or 4 months between finishing high school and the start of college that's causing these students to change their mind, to not go to college after all. What is that something? Well, I think we all know in the room what it is. It's us. It's us at Georgia State. It's all of us in this room. It's the higher ed sector that puts all these roadblocks in front of the students. So leading up to the summer of 2016, the next summer, we did an audit of all the bureaucratic steps we expect an incoming freshman to complete before they're ready for the first day of classes at Georgia State. Embarrassingly, we found there are about 14 different things we expect students to do. You're well familiar with a lot of them. The FAFSA I won't even go into, but I think we all know that very few 18-year-olds will complete that successfully on their own. We got a lot more familiar with the verification process. For those of you not familiar with that, just like the IRS runs algorithms to select certain tax returns for audits, so too the federal government uses algorithms to pull some of the FAFSAs for further verification. Unlike the IRS that audits under 1% of US tax returns, this past fall at Georgia State, 34% of our students were selected for verification. So if you're an incoming freshman, and as you now know, mostly first-generation low income, if you're coming into Georgia State, you're getting a notice sometime in July or August before your freshman fall from the federal government of the sort saying, oh, we see on your FAFSA you indicate your grandma is your legal guardian and claim that your parents are not providing financially for you. Please provide written verification of your grandmother's status. Well, we all know how this works in low-income families. They're not going to lawyers to fill out paperwork. You know, mom and dad are gone, grandma takes over. The student looks at the request, says, well, I know my grandmother doesn't have written verification, I don't have written verification. The federal government's saying I need that verification in order to get my financial aid. Guess I'm not going to college after all. State of Georgia has immunization requirements, and I think it's a fine public health policy, but I can tell you when you look at the data, and you won't be surprised, it's a big differentiator when it comes to economic background. Because the middle and upper income students don't get tripped up by the immunization requirement. And it's not because they're more empowered or more skilled bureaucratically. They're able to hand the request to mom or dad who send in their immunization records. But if you're that same student we're talking about being raised by grandma, and again you say, I don't have any immunization records, I know my grandma doesn't, and Georgia State's saying I need these records before I can register, guess I'm not going to college. So each of these 14 steps was a differentiator, weeded out some of our freshman class, and disproportionately weeded out the students we need to succeed with. In fact, when we talk to equity gaps, this is what's so depressing. The equity gaps are beginning before the student has even attended their first class at Georgia State. We're already pulling out some of the low-income students, the students of color, and so forth. So what we did for the summer of 2016, the next cycle, is change in some simple ways the way we onboard our students. We now have a survey we give students the moment they're admitted to Georgia State. We deliver it on their smart devices, and we ask all the questions you would never ask on a college application. You know, do you have a disability? Are you working? How many hours a week? Are you working to support your family or your household in addition to trying to pay for college? What class in high school did you really dread? The point is to begin to develop a personalized communication flow with students from the moments that they're first admitted to the university. Then we work with one of our partners, EAB, to develop a portal to help take students through the 14 steps they need to complete in order to be ready for the first day of class. It's all color-coded, so as they complete a step, it changes color. There are resources and help on those pages. I'll say as an administrator, the biggest help to me of this particular portal is that we finally know where a student is in the process. We used to know a student was engaged, and then we stopped hearing from them. Now we know a student was engaged up until the moment we asked for their immunization records, and then we stopped hearing from them. So we can reach out with much more specific help. And after a couple years of collecting this data, it empowered me to go to the administration and make a significant change for this last cycle. We offer over the course of the summer over 40 orientations, groups of 250 at a time who come in and register for classes and learn about campus and so forth. This past summer, for the first time, at every one of those 40 orientations, we contracted with a mobile health clinic. It parked outside of the orientation, and it delivered free immunizations on the spot. It does not make any sense to send a low-income first-generation student home saying, oh, please come back after you've been immunized for measles, like what they're going to do, check the Rolodex for the local physicians in the area. And so we provide that. It costs about $50 a person, and it's a huge benefit not only to the students and some of the numbers, as I'll share in a second, but it's a huge benefit from an ROI perspective. You know, the demographics in Wisconsin are not looking good. If you, for a $50 immunization, can get, hold on to a student who otherwise might walk away and never enroll at your institution, you should seize that opportunity. The third thing we did, and this is the one that's gotten the most national attention, is we became one of the first schools in the country to use an AI-enhanced chatbot for student success purposes. What's a chatbot? It's just an automatic texting platform. What we did is we built up a knowledge base of over 2,000 text-based answers to questions commonly asked by incoming freshmen about financial aid and registration and immunization records and all these other sorts of issues. We work with a tech partner, in this case a company called AdmitHub, to take those 2,000 responses and put them on a smart device. Right? It's not an app. We didn't want students having to sign on to something else. They just go onto their texting platform, begin a conversation with Pounce. Pounce is the Panther, our school mascot. And after that point, they can converse with Pounce 24/7. They just text a question. The knowledge base does not write the answers to these questions. Our legal office would have none of that. Instead, what the AI does is go in, once the question comes in, and uses algorithms to pull out the right response among the knowledge base, or make a determination that there isn't a right response, in which case the AI takes the question, delivers it to a staff person who writes the response, vets it, adds it to the knowledge base, so the knowledge base is constantly growing and getting smarter. You know, this whole technology is not completely new. It's similar to the FAQs you and Georgia State and other places have had on their websites for a long time. These simple queries, in this example, it was a student asking about parking on campus, and depending on whether they want to park every day or just occasionally, they would get a different response. But what the AI is able to do is so much more potent than that. This is the map of what it looked like with our FAQs for a question about parking. This is the map of what a query looks like in our chatbot now if a student asks about financial aid. And depending upon whether they're a dependent or independent, whether they're in-state or out-of-state, do they have this scholarship or not, and so forth, they're taking through a real language conversation that can actually direct them through this whole process. When we launched this chatbot in June of 2016, about 3 months before the start of fall classes, and it launched just for our incoming freshmen, we estimated maybe we would have 5,000 to 6,000 questions answered on the chatbot over those 3 months. In just those 3 months, just for our incoming freshmen, we had over 185,000 questions answered. Average response time was about 6 seconds. What we saw in the data was very telling. The use of the chatbot that first summer remains true to this day. It was heavier at 1 in the morning than at 9 in the morning. Tells you something about our business practices, right? We're happy to open our offices up. The students aren't there. When they're asking the questions, we're closed tight. The chatbot has the advantage of being available 24/7. A more sobering detail we saw, after that first summer, we ran focus groups with the freshmen who had used the chatbot, and we heard recurringly that a number of students told us they asked the chatbot questions they wouldn't have asked a human being. If you're can't get your biological father to sign the FAFSA because you haven't seen him for the last 2 years, the last thing you want to do is sit down in front of some stranger and spill out your family's personal history to that individual. And the student said they liked the fact, they knew it was a bot, they knew it was non-judgmental. They could ask the silliest question, the most basic question, and not expose themselves to any kind of embarrassment. And they could see it as a way of getting them through these processes. So did these relatively low-cost changes make a difference? They made a huge difference. In the 3 years since we've had these interventions in place and scaled them across our whole freshman class, we've reduced summer melt at Georgia State by 37%. Given the size of our incoming freshman class at the main campus, the bachelor's campus at Georgia State, that's about 350 students, mostly low-income students of color, who are in their seats ready to go the first day of class, who are sitting out college in its entirety. And because it's worked so well for our incoming freshmen, we have a grant from Dell and ECMC foundations to expand the use of the chatbot for all our continuing students. So this spring at Georgia State, we have over 20,000 of our undergraduates day-to-day on a chatbot, able to ask any question they have about any issue. Where do I go to get chemistry tutoring? What do I do if I have a fine that I can't pay, and so forth? All of these questions coming in literally by the hundreds of thousands every month, with the chatbot responding immediately to over 90% of the questions asked. And we've seen the same thing. In each case, we've run random control trials by an independent evaluator, and she has been able to determine a very positive impact. In the case for our continuing students, it's not that the chatbot has proven effective in helping the students make life decisions. What should I do with my life? What should I major in? But when it comes to transactional issues, I've got a hold on my account, how do I remove it? I need to see an advisor because I've got this notification, how do I set up an appointment, and so forth. We're seeing response rates from the students on the chatbot 20, 30, and 40% higher than for students not on the chatbot. And as you work as a collaborative through Moonshot, through Complete College America, I'll say this is another area where collaboration can accelerate progress. The first summer we launched the chatbot, over 70% of the questions came in were about financial aid. I can tell you the most work that goes into launching a chatbot is developing a knowledge base. Well, if the questions are about financial aid, and a lot of work goes into developing them, there's no reason every one of your campuses has to do its own work in developing a knowledge base, because the answers will be the same. The federal questions will be the same. A student is struggling with verification, or question 7 on the FAFSA, the answer is the same. And across Wisconsin, if it has to do with state policy or state scholarships, the answer will be the same. So you can pool your resources and accelerate the rate of change. Second example, 2.6. 2.6 was the number of majors that the average Georgia State student was going through before they graduated about 7 or 8 years ago. This was a disaster, especially when you enroll low-income students, because the low-income students can ill afford to bounce between 2.5 majors before they graduate. Every time they switch majors, they're creating wasted credit hour, added time to degree, and I can assure you by our data, a subset are dropping out with no degree whatsoever. And when we took a hard look at ourselves, again, this was another instance where we had to admit we were the problem. We offer 100 majors at Georgia State. This spring semester at Georgia State, we have 12,000 different course sections available across all of our campuses. And in our infinite wisdom, we'd bring new freshmen in to a room this size, actually larger, about 250 at a time, and somebody would stand up in front of the room and tell them to pick. You know, pick a major, pick 5 or 6 classes. That was the extent of we didn't sit down individually with the students, we were just asking them to navigate this on their own. And they were compliant enough to follow our directions, they would pick, but they had to be ill-informed, uninformed choices, and we got the results we could expect. Students would get a couple classes into their accounting major and say, that's not what I thought it'd be at all, and switch to something else. And we weren't helping them make a more informed choice in that case either. So we've totally changed the way we onboard all Georgia State students across all our campuses academically. Every new freshman now is required to be in a learning community, a group of 25 students. They travel in all their first semester classes together, 5 or 6 classes together. Just by this bonding experience, and it didn't cost us anything, courses remain the same size, we just slot the students and register them in a more coordinated fashion. For instance, all our classes are not capped at 25. We have a big lecture hall of 75 in American government, but you can be assured that 24 familiar faces will be in that class with you, because they'll be the same students that will travel with you to English composition and to your chemistry lab, or whatever the schedule looks like. So the students do the heavy lifting, right? They're making friendships and study partnerships and catching up with each other when somebody misses classes, borrowing, sharing notes, and so forth. Just from that structure alone, we saw a significant increase in first-year GPA and first-year retention rates. But to deal with the challenge of the students moving between majors, 7 years ago, we began requiring every one of those learning communities be based on a MetaMajor. So we no longer put pressure on any Georgia State student to pick among the 100 majors we offer as they come in. If they want to pick, that's fine, but they're still going to be put in a MetaMajor. Instead, what we're trying to do is slot them into these broad categories. Are you interested in business, or the arts, or STEM? If so, we find 24 other students. That way it helps us direct the courses they take that first semester. Every one of the learning communities has a 1-hour orientation course taught by a faculty member in that MetaMajor, who exposes the students to the field So in the business school, the faculty have actually been quite participatory in this. You know, they'll do open houses in the departments, so students will, 1 week get to meet the accounting faculty, then the marketing, the finance faculty. They'll do alumni panels and have graduates talk about what they're doing. Give the students a fighting chance of making an informed decision the first time, especially when you enroll lots of low-income students. And to help the students think through these choices, this is another partnership we have with EAB, where we're working on, in every advising session, exposing the students to job data from the metro Atlanta area that gets the students to think through what are some of the implications of the academic choices they're making. In this case, it's a student who says they're interested in nursing, so they can see how many jobs are listed for nurses. What's the starting salary if you have an associate's degree in nursing? What's the starting salary if you have a bachelor's degree in nursing? How long does it take to get the degree at Georgia State? But like Amazon or Netflix that say, you like these books or movies, you might like these others, we say, well, if you like nursing, you may like these other programs we have at Georgia State. We have health informatics and public health and health management, and we have a degree on our 2-year campus in radiologic technology, and here's all the data about those careers as well. The point is, don't do this in their senior year when they've already made all their academic choices. Begin talking about this as they're working their way through the pipeline. To get the faculty involved, we've launched a program where we give seed grants to faculty. They're quite modest, I will say, in the amount of money, but they give faculty an incentive to do something really simple. We knew we couldn't get faculty to be teaching career competencies as such. But we also knew that faculty in any major are very strong believers that what they are teaching is highly important to their students. I'm actually a faculty member in religious studies. My field is religious ethics. And I taught full-time in the classroom for 20 years. And I believe to the core of my being that religious studies is really a useful discipline, even though every ranking nationally shows it's one of the majors that people think is least practical and parents recoil against. But you're learning worldviews, learning different cultures, how to interact. There's a lot of communication, both written and oral and so forth. And religious studies majors do really well, especially 5 and 10 years out of their college studies and so forth. I will admit, though, in 20 years of teaching, there was never a moment in any one of those classes where I paused for an entire session and said, let's talk for a little while about the competencies you're learning in this class and how they might be useful and practical to you after you graduate. And that's just what this seed grant program is designed to do. The example you have on the screen is a real one. We put this offer out there for faculty within their existing classes. Just create one assignment that has the students contemplate the career competencies they're learning in your discipline. The faculty of the history department came together as a group and said, we offer this big course in U.S. history, multiple sections every semester. We're going to add an assignment. Now, in every U.S. history section at Georgia State, students are given a primary data set of historical data. They're brought to computer labs. They learn data visualization tools, and one of their graded assignments is to take the primary data set and find a way to convey to an external audience the significance of the historical data. The students love it. They're out of the classroom. They're doing something. They do see it as practical, something they might apply later on. The faculty love it because they're getting students to realize, no, history is not all about memorizing dates. It's about understanding historical trends and being able to convey the significance of those trends to others. We're doing about 10 of these a semester, 10 of these grants a semester. So after 5 years, we're going to have about 200 courses at the lower level in the freshman and sophomore years that have the students pausing to think about career competencies. And then every student that comes into Georgia State now has a career Eportfolio. They're assigned from the moment they are matriculated. This is like LinkedIn on steroids. It allows students not only to post data files, but audio files, video files. As they go through the curriculum, extracurricular and curricular, we encourage them to document what they're doing so that they have a record. They can share this record with potential employers for internships or jobs after graduation. But more than that, what we're trying to do is get our mostly first-generation low-income student body to be much more aware of the connection between what they're doing day to day and what's going to be important to employers and others as they leave the university. So they don't get to that first job interview and stumble when somebody says, well, what have you done digitally? They can say, oh yeah, in my American history class I did this visualization of the spread of this disease in the Southeast, or whatever the issue is. By making these structural changes to the way we onboard students, we've seen profound differences in voluntary student behavior. So here's an interesting data point. This is the percent of Georgia, or the number of Georgia State students who visit University Career Services before their senior year. Before we launched these changes, the average time a Georgia State student first visited University Career Services was not only in their last year with us, in their last semester with us. Now, the most common time a student first visits University Career Services is in their freshman year. The students haven't changed, right? They're the same students we're enrolling. They're still first-generation, low-income students and so forth. But we've created a context where they've begun to think about these issues much earlier. And so did it have impact on that data point I started the section discussing, all the students moving between majors? It's had a huge impact. Not where we want to be yet, but I will warn you that nothing you do is going to change the needle by 100%. Right? And here we've had a significant drop, a 32% drop in the number of students at Georgia State who changed their major after their freshman year. They're finding the right fit earlier on. They're not bouncing around in their sophomore, junior, and worse senior years. And as you'll see in a few minutes, they're graduating at higher rates, but also much more quickly than they were before. Third example, 43% was the percent of students attempting introductory math courses at Georgia State and getting non-passing grades a decade ago. A disaster, especially for low-income students who can't take a required course their first semester and then have to repeat it over and over again, and some were repeating it multiple times. We had hundreds of students every year who were dropping out of Georgia State because they couldn't get through the math requirement. The biggest state scholarship is GPA dependent. You have to hold on to a 3.0, and we were having hundreds of students lose that 3.0 GPA just because of the math requirement. So we've totally changed the way we deliver introductory math at Georgia State. We offer no sections of didactic lecture hall introductory math any longer. Every single section we offer is done in a hybrid, adaptive fashion. Students meet with their instructors and their classmates in a computer lab at the same time. They're working at adaptive exercises. They're all learning at their own pace. I think the biggest difference is, if you were math phobic before, and a lot of our students are math phobic, and you got into a big lecture hall, you'd plunk yourself in the last row, slump down, and hope you're never called on. And in many cases, your wish would be fulfilled, right? Because the classes were not set up to be interactive. Every hour that a student is in one of these labs, they're getting about 100 bits of immediate personalized feedback. So they're answering a question and then immediately getting feedback from the program. Their instructors can then come in to answer additional questions and so forth. Has it worked? Well, it's made a big difference. We're not where we want to be yet, but for the same courses, and actually with better longitudinal outcomes in subsequent math and STEM courses, and I'll share that in a minute, we've reduced the DFW rate by 35%. That translates into about 1,300 more students every year getting through their math requirement, their first attempt, rather than taking multiple attempts or never getting through it at all. And because it's worked so well in math, we have a faculty-led initiative now to convert 15,000 seats in the social sciences, psychology, economics, political science, to hybrid adaptive classes as well. One warning there is, you have to have patience with transformative change. A lot of these changes require a fundamentally different approach to the way faculty, in this case, or staff, are operating. And at times, the initial period, the pilot period, doesn't immediately produce great results. When the faculty started this initiative to convert their social science courses to adaptive, the first semester, and we did keep it as a very small pilot, some of the DFW rates actually went up. But what's happened over the last 2 years as we've tweaked and refined and looked at what sections were working of the course and which sections not, is now we're producing better results across those sections. And for those sections or courses that are not going through pedagogical changes, we have one of the largest NearPeer tutoring programs in the country. Again, it's data-based. We look in the data for freshman and sophomore year classes that have high non-pass rates. We look for our work study students who do well in those classes, and we pull them out of their current assignments. If you have a sophomore who aced organic chemistry, don't put them answering phones at some front desk. Pull them out and get them to help other students figure out how to do organic chemistry. So our model is we put them through training and pay them to go through training. We pay them to sit in on every class session of a section of the course they already succeeded in. So the student will get embedded in this semester's version of organic chemistry. The students will get to know them, the instructor, and so forth. And then they do 3 group tutoring sessions every week. We're tracking all the attendance via card swipes. And we've seen profound changes for what is relatively a low-cost program. Students who attend at least 5 of these tutoring sessions doing about half a letter grade better. And because it's worked so well and it's scalable because of the cost, we offered over 1,000 course sections at Georgia State this past academic year that had a NearPeer tutor embedded in the course throughout the semester. Fourth example, 1,000. 1,000 was the number of students fully registered and qualified who we were dropping from their classes every semester because they couldn't cover the cost of their tuition and fees. This was devastating for us. We spent all our time trying to figure out how to succeed with students and get them through the various hurdles I've been describing so far this morning. And then we were turning around and taking students who were academically successful and dropping them from their rosters and not allowing them to proceed. And when we looked at our data, what was really sobering is when students got dropped involuntarily for financial reasons, only about 30% of them ever came back and completed their degree at Georgia State. So we looked at the data more closely. One of the most surprising things we found is the biggest subset of the students we were dropping for financial reasons every semester were seniors. Why seniors? They're usually good risks for retention, right? It's the freshmen who drop out at the highest rates. Well, because we enroll almost all low-income students, it was the seniors who were running out of eligibility for their aid. That nice state scholarship I was referring to a second ago, it covers 127 credit hours, no more. So you get about 70% of your tuition covered for those credit hours, again, for a subset of our students who maintain a GPA. But our students live complicated lives. 85% of our students are working. Many of them have families. If there's been one semester where you had to withdraw from your classes because of a work or family obligation, you're going to run out of the Hope Scholarship before you complete all your requirements. So we literally had students walking away from Georgia State 1 and 2 semesters away from graduation, never to come back again. And when we looked at the balances, some of the students owed $7,000, but some of the students owed $400. And we know in this room that that is enough of a barrier to keep a student enrolled. I sometimes have to explain to the legislators and so forth that if you're, maxed out your loans and you no longer have any scholarship money, you're not going to mom or dad or an uncle and saying, give me $400 because they don't have the $400. It really is a pathway out of the university. So in 2011, we started a simple program. It was seen as quite radical at the time, even by some of my colleagues at Georgia State. We call it Panther retention grants. Part of the recipe is students do nothing, and I can't advocate for that enough. Too many of our programs require students to jump through bureaucratic hoops. They have to self-identify and fill out forms and so forth, and you only get a subset of the qualified students. We took the following approach. We know which students we're about to drop because they haven't paid us their bills. After all, we're the ones about to drop them. Secondly, we know which students are close to graduating, which students are on path, taking the right courses, making good progress, and so forth. This is not a merit-based program at all. You can have a 2.0 GPA or a 4.0 GPA and be equally qualified. But are you taking the right courses, and are you plugging away, and are you close to graduating? And so what we did the first semester, we had $40,000 from our president to experiment, is just look for the students who had the lowest balances and help as many as possible. What we did right before we pressed the button to drop the students is instead, for the students who got these grants, put the money in their accounts. Our financial aid office did so. We called them up, say, don't make other plans Monday morning because we just covered the last $800, $1,200, up to $1,500 on your balance. We had multiple students hanging up on us. They thought it was a scam. And believe anybody from Georgia State just put $1,200, no way anybody put $1,200 in the account. We literally had to say, go check your, sign on and check your account. You'll see that you're good to go. But what we found, it was an amazingly efficient way of using institutional aid. I'm all for freshman scholarships. I would never talk against them. But the reality is it's a pretty blunt instrument. These are students who have no track record at college, who you invest in some cases thousands of dollars each year for 4 years. Here, these are students who, if they're seniors, as most of the recipients are, have proven themselves for 3 years. They've gotten through the math, and they've picked their major and done all the other things we've been talking about, and they're successful. And so by giving a little bit of money at that point, you can make a big difference. And you see some of the numbers on the board. For an average grant of about $900, over 85% of the recipients go on to graduate, where in the past only 30% of these students were coming back and eventually completing their degrees. And because it's worked so well, we have scaled this program immensely. We've given 17,000 of these grants out since 2011. Now you might rightfully ask, how can Georgia State with a small endowment and low tuition afford to give 17,000 grants out? That's about $2 million a year for those of you who are beginning to do the math in your head. Well, others have asked the same question. The Gates Foundation was very interested in this program. We were one of the first nationally to scale anything like this. So they paid for Boston Consulting Group to come in for 6 weeks, look at all our data over the years, and analyze what's been going on. They wrote a report, which is available on our website. I'll share the website at the end of the presentation, and came up with the conclusion this program runs in the black. It generates more revenue than it costs. Why? Because we give students on average $900. We immediately get back $900 because it just pays what they owe us. But the average student who's gotten one of these grants of $900 had a bill that semester for $2,800. So they had already put $1,900 out of pocket or out of loans and so forth. They were trying to pay down their balance. And so by giving them the $900, you get the $900 back, but you also hold on to the $1,900 that otherwise walks away from your university. And oh, by the way, some of those students will then come back for a subsequent semester and contribute even more. So Boston Consulting claims that this program that some people were horrified was kind of going to sap our revenues away from Georgia State has generated about 30% more revenue for the university than it's ended up costing us. A rare instance where doing the right thing is also doing the self-interested thing. And shouldn't we seize upon those rare opportunities? Okay, my last example, but it's the one that kind of brings things home most explicitly to talking about advising, and maybe the one that we're most known for at Georgia State, started with this gruesome number, 5,700. 5,700 was the number of students who are dropping out of Georgia State every year. This is different from the groups we were just talking about. The group we were just talking about were not dropping out, we were forcing them out, right? They were registered and ready to go, and we were cleaning out their records because they couldn't pay us. These are the other groups, the silent attrition that goes on day to day, where a student is registered one semester and doesn't re-register. You know, they don't come to any office. Almost none of our students ever tell us in advance they're dropping out. They just stop coming, right? And you know, we would try to figure out what was going on, and we had great difficulty doing so. So we became one of EAB's very first partners nationally back in 2011, 2012. We signed an agreement. At the time, there was no Navigate or any kind of platform that we were agreeing to. Initially, we agreed, in essence, on a research project, which was to look at our data. We looked at 10 years of data, 2.5 million grades, 140,000 student records, to see if we could figure out, were there any statistical correlations between identifiable behaviors while the students were with us and the students who ultimately dropped out of Georgia State. We postulated maybe we'd find a few dozen. We actually found 800. So 800 academic behaviors that correlate in a statistically significant way to students who are likely to drop or flunk out of Georgia State. And what we've been doing for over 7 years now, since August 2012, is tracking every single Georgia State student every single day for every one of those 800 risk factors. As we update all our information systems, we're looking for any of those behaviors. And we set up this complicated advising change, streamlined in some ways, but definitely scaled, in which we have every student being tracked by an academic advisor. So when an alert goes off, the very next morning, there is a person responsible for reaching out to that student, and within 48 hours, they're charged to do so. What kind of things we're tracking? Well, over 7 years, I will say, the most common things we are noting as risk factors for our students are just common sense things. Students registering for the wrong classes. Every semester, this spring, we found 3,000 students before the semester began who were in courses that didn't apply to their major when they registered, or were in courses they were taking out of sequence. And in the past, most of those 3,000 would have been allowed to pay for and take the wrong course. And by the way, that kills the GPAs in many cases because they are in the wrong course, and that's rarely a helpful thing for them. And so now we have alerts go off, and we're tracking every registration record, and advisors are reaching out to the students to get them in the right courses. Other thing we're looking at are the so-called predictive analytics. These get more attention nationally. These are actually Georgia State data, not fictionalized in any way. What we found, for instance, is a strong correlation between the first grade a student gets in their major and their chances of graduating on time. So if you're a political science major at Georgia State, get an A or B in your first political science course, you're graduating on time from Georgia State at about a 75% clip. If you get a C in that first class, you're graduating on time at a 25% clip. But what had we done historically with that C student? Nothing. Worse than nothing, we mislead them. Our academic policies say, you got a C grade, you're now eligible to take upper level coursework in political science. Well, how many of us would honestly say to a student who has a 25% chance of succeeding, oh, you're ready to go on? But that's just what we've been doing for really generations at Georgia State. Now we have an alert goes off when the C grade is registered. We sit down with the student. Are there reading and writing issues? Are you working 40 hours a week? Why don't we try to diagnose what the problem is now while it's manageable, than sitting back waiting a year until the student collects D's and F's and they're on academic probation and they've lost their merit scholarship, and then we get off our whatevers and try to help the student. The trick is to do this at scale. Over the last 12 months alone at our Atlanta campus alone, so just for our bachelor students, we've had over 60,000 one-on-one meetings between advisors and students that were prompted by alerts coming out of the platform. We did not correct all 60,000 problems, but I can say 7 years ago, these were 60,000 issues that were going completely undiagnosed by Georgia State. Students were signing up for the wrong classes, they were underperforming in prerequisites, nobody was lifting a finger. We were expecting our mostly first-generation low-income student body to have diagnostic powers that we lacked. And now we've finally taken some responsibility for helping students navigate through this incredibly complex bureaucracy that we've created at Georgia State. Did this intervention make a difference? It made a big difference. We launched in August 2012. We immediately saw a significant spike in our progression rates. The biggest gains were not for our traditional freshmen. They were for our part-time students, our military learners, our adult learners, our transfer students. All these students who tend to sail under the radar screen are getting tracked for 800 risk factors every day and getting these interventions, and it makes a big difference. I alluded to this earlier. We've seen a significant drop in average time to degree at Georgia State. So over the last 5 or so years, we've cut more than half a semester off the time it takes a student to earn a bachelor's degree. Not because we've lowered any graduation requirement, we have not, but because students are meeting those graduation requirements more efficiently. They're finding the right major earlier on, they're registered for the right classes in the right order, and you can see what's happened as a result. And if you think that doesn't matter, this is what it translates to as far as the students' wallets are concerned. The graduating class last spring of 19 compared to the graduating class 7 years earlier before we launched these changes, the savings were about $18 million in tuition and fees just because they were meeting all their requirements more efficiently. And maybe the most surprising results of our use of predictive analytics and proactive advising are these. That when we launched, most faculty were supportive, but there was a minority opinion that was quite vocal that what we were doing, as the argument went, was creating a system for moving students to easier majors. The premise being, if you advise students every day by probabilities, they'll all end up taking the easiest majors and the easiest courses. Well, Georgia State may be the best test case for that theory nationally, because we've been doing this for 7 years. We've had over 500,000 one-on-one meetings with students based on the alerts coming out of the system. Our 2 fastest growing majors over those 7 years, computer science and biology. Nobody thinks that those are among the easiest majors at Georgia State. And every year since we've had this system in place, we've set new records for the number of STEM majors being conferred at the bachelor's level. And I have a couple samples there of demographic groups that nationally struggle in STEM fields, and you can see the red indicates the increase over the last 7 years in STEM conferrals for those groups. In blue is the change in enrollment for those groups. I wanted to show that there's been really exponential gains even relative to increased enrollments. And what's striking when we look at our data is we haven't seen a huge increase in the number of Georgia State students declaring STEM majors. What we've seen is a huge decline in the number of Georgia State students declaring STEM majors and then wiping out after a semester or 2. We used to be perfectly happy to enroll a student in your biochemistry, incoming freshman, low-income first generation, and sit back passively while they struggled in calculus and struggled in orgo. And after a year, they had either dropped out or we were sitting down with them saying, you got to pick another major because you failed all the required courses for organic chemistry. Now we have alerts going off as early as 3 weeks into the first semester. What might have been a D on the midterm, maybe it's a B minus. And by the final, it gets pulled up to a B plus, and that student is ready to go on and hopefully succeed in the next semester. So in conclusion, let me pull these strains together and talk about in aggregate what happens when you scale these kind of coordinated changes across a big institution like Georgia State. What are the impacts? Well, the first impact wasn't initially expected, but is appreciated, which is, in effect, it's changed the national reputation of Georgia State. This was campus about 2 years ago. You will probably recognize the gentleman on the far right there. When Bill Gates came to campus, what was most interesting is that we did not invite him. He invited himself. He was going to give a keynote in downtown Atlanta on World Health, and like 3 weeks before, his team calls us up and says, Bill's going to be in town this particular day. Would you mind if he dropped by for a couple hours to learn more about what you're doing at Georgia State? We said, just this once, we'll allow it. But he was serious, though. He did not meet the president. There was no ceremony. He snuck in kind of a back door, and he spent 2.5 hours with us talking about these programs, with me, my colleague Allison Calhoun-Brown, some of our first-generation students. We had a room set up with all the technology, EAB and the Chatbot and so forth. He was fascinated by what we were doing. And, when you think about this institution that was segregated and so grossly underperforming, it is important to the identity and morale of our students, our faculty and staff, to have somebody like Bill Gates say, this is important enough that I want to learn more about it. I had the honor of speaking twice at the White House now. Former President Obama gave us a citation for one program. He's cited as a national model, the Panther Retention Grant Program. Been a little quieter over the last few years. I don't know if anything's changed in DC. They've stopped calling. I don't know. In all seriousness, though, because we all live in complicated political times. I know Wisconsin's had some challenging issues over the last 4 or 5 years. Georgia, we're a very blue island of Atlanta in a very, very red state. In all honesty, the nice thing about these efforts is it's one of the few issues that unites people politically. So if you're all about social justice and equity, this is the right thing to do. If you're all about workforce and efficiencies and tax base and so forth, this is the right thing to do. I kid about the Trump White House, but after Betsy DeVos was confirmed by the Senate, the second place she visited was for Georgia State, and she was very supportive and complimentary about what we were doing. I mentioned speaking at the White House under the Obama administration, but I've also testified in front of the U.S. Senate, and that was at the invitation of the Republican delegation. So, this is a winning issue if we play it out right, using our resources better, helping to solve social and economic problems at the same time. A second result, which we didn't fully anticipate, is it's changed the financial footing of the university. Our bond ratings have gone way up. Why? Because there are really good revenues to be had from holding on to the students that you currently register. Every 1% we improve our retention rate at the main campus, the Atlanta campus of Georgia State, it's worth about $3 million a year in additional revenues. Well, over the time I've been describing this morning, we haven't improved our success rates by 1 point. We've improved them by 23 percentage points. So we're talking about $60 to $70 million a year that are coming into the university. I mentioned the drop of appropriations from the state of Georgia of $40 million. These initiatives saved us over this time period. Huge cuts and reductions in force and loss of faculty and staff and so forth. But I am a religious ethicist, and so my main motivating factor is not the ROI, it's this, that despite all those demographic changes I started off describing this morning, over this time period we've doubled the number of non-white students we're enrolling, we've doubled our low-income students, our SAT scores are down by 33 points, we're graduating 3,000 more students every year than we were just 7 or 8 years ago. And when you look where those gains have come from, so that's a 73% increase overall, they've come predominantly from all the groups that struggle the most under the old bureaucracy. Up 73% overall, but as you can see, 130% for our African American students, 190% for our Hispanic and our Pell students. Not because any one of these programs is targeted by race, ethnicity, or income level. You haven't heard me once mention that this morning. What we've done is found problems that the university is creating and solve them, or at least help reduce the problems for all students, scale the solution. And what happened when we did so is all students improved, but the students who improved the most, not surprisingly in retrospect, were the students who were tripped up the most by the bureaucracy we had in place in the past. These are the students who lack that invisible support system. They don't have brothers and sisters and parents and others who can navigate and tell them, oh, if you didn't get your aid, this is where you go to appeal, or if you got a C in that course, you've got to go to tutoring and so forth. And these are the students who are getting that kind of support day to day now, and it's making a transformative difference. And this is just how transformative the difference is. So here are the graduation rates since we've launched these programs over the period I'm talking about this morning. The blue is where we started at the beginning of the presentation when we were around 30%, 20% for African Americans. We haven't improved our graduation rates incrementally. We've improved them exponentially. Our graduation rates for our African American students are getting close to having tripled now. For African American males, they've already tripled. our Hispanic students almost tripling, and so forth. And what's happened for 5 years in a row now, we think we're the only public university that can claim this, is for 5 years in a row, our Pell, our African American, and our Hispanic students have all graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. So at Georgia State, race, ethnicity, income level no longer are predictors of which students are going to graduate. And this campus in the shadow of the Martin Luther King district that was segregated into the 1960s and grossly underperforming for students of color as recently as a decade ago, now and for 6 years in a row has conferred more bachelor's degrees to African American students than any other college or university in the United States. And isn't that a more fitting tribute, to this native son, Martin Luther King, whose geography, we share on a day-to-day basis. My last slide, and then we'll have a chance for a couple quick questions, is about this consolidation with Perimeter College, this large community college in Metro Atlanta area. When I go on the road and talk, one of the common challenges is, yeah, it worked at Georgia State, does it work elsewhere? Well, as we go into conversation, I can point that there are a number of universities nationally who have taken these same approaches and are seeing significant, and in some cases exponential changes in their success rates and great reductions in equity gaps. But the state of Georgia handed us a great example 3 years ago, because they came to us, and we didn't have much choice, and said, we're going to bring this community college, we're going to merge it with you, 20,000 students, grossly underperforming, and actually having huge budget deficits. So the year we took over Perimeter College, they were running annual budget deficits of about $6 million a year. And so this is what's happened in a relatively short period of time. In a little over 3 years, the way too low 3-year IPEDS graduation rate, which was around 6%, is basically tripled. It's still way too low, but it shows that these sorts of approaches are not just for one type of student or one subpopulation. They help many, many students from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of preparation. We didn't raise the tuition rates or the academic admission standards at Perimeter College one bit. These are the same before as they are today. And then some of you may have seen this in the Chronicle just 2 weeks ago. They did a ranking for the first time of community colleges. They looked at about 840 community colleges nationally. And the headline was, graduation rates underestimate the success of community colleges, because many students, as we all know, who go to two-year institutions don't have the ultimate goal of getting an associate's degree. Their ultimate goal is going on to a 4-year institution and getting a bachelor's degree. So they did a national ranking of community college based on the percent of students who get the associate's degree within 3 years, plus those who are successfully transferred into 4-year institutions. And this Perimeter College, running in deficits 3 years ago and grossly underperforming, is now in the top 20 nationally, with 83% of the students either getting their associate's degree or successfully transferring to 4-year institutions. So, my closing word to you is the lesson of Georgia State is one of particular programs and initiatives. We're happy to host some of you if you want to come to campus and learn from our advising staff, our financial aid staff, the Chatbot team, and so forth, what we're doing. All that's important. But I will say there's a more important overarching message I want to leave you with. I'm part of a generation, as some of you are, that grew up in education literature that traced the roots of the equity gaps to early on in the lives of our students. You can see the equity gaps in 8th grade math scores. You can see them in 3rd grade reading scores. There have even been studies that show that equity gaps begin to crop up pre-K, prior to even kindergarten. And some of us concluded from those studies that that meant that the die was cast, the demographics were already in place, and by the time the students get to us, there's really nothing we can do. I think the most important message of Georgia State is to say that's a lie, right? It's not the case that we don't have the power to make a difference. And in some ways it should be very encouraging and empowering to all of us in this room, that based upon our dedication to the students and our dedication to transformative and systematic change, which I will admit is painful, we can transform outcomes for our students, and we can finally deliver on the promises that we've been making to these students and their families for generations. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the important work you do.